The message arrived in the middle of a laugh I didn't mean. I was sitting at Lucas's dining table. The kind that seats 8, the only 3 of us ever used it. The overhead pendant light threw a golden pool across polished oak, catching the glint of the wine in my glass. Nicole had just brought out the main course, roasted lamb with rosemary, the smell so comforting I wanted to sink into it. She always cooked as though preparing for a magazine photo shoot. Every sprig of parsley turned just so. My phone buzzed against the fabric of my dress. I glanced down, expecting maybe a reminder from the pharmacy or a message from Ruth about church choir practice. Instead, the words on the glowing screen were sharp, urgent, and cold. Get up and go. Do not speak to your son. No greeting, no signature, no room for questions. The kind of command you either obey without hesitation or live to regret ignoring. I stared at the letters, my fork hovering above my plate. The aroma of rosemary suddenly acrid in my throat. Nicole was watching me. I could feel it before I looked up. She had that subtle, appraising tilt of her head she used when she wanted to read my mood. I gave her nothing, a tiny smile. The kind you wear at funerals when you do not trust yourself to speak. Lucas reached across the table for the salt, his voice light. Everything all right, Mom? I slid the phone into my lap and let my fingers curl over the screen, hiding it. Yes, I said. Though the word tasted wrong, my mind was already racing. Who would send me something like that? Why tonight, here now? The screen lit again in my lap, another vibration against my thigh. My stomach tightened as I lowered my eyes. Police are coming, 2 minutes. My chair scraped against the hardwood before I could think. I pressed a hand to my temple, leaning into it. I think my blood pressure's spiking. I murmured, just need to lie down for a bit. Lucas frowned, his fork clinking against his plate. You don't look well. Do you want me to? No, I cut in gently, trying to make it sound like the voice of reason rather than desperation. Stay and eat. I'll be fine once I rest. Nicole rose halfway from her seat, then paused. Do you need water? I have some in the car, I lied. My purse was already in my grip, the zipper half closed from when I had taken out my phone earlier. I did not wait for their replies. I walked toward the front door at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual, just steady enough to seem like a woman managing a dizzy spell. My fingers found the door handle, the cool metal grounding me for one heartbeat. The night air outside hit me like a slap. It was heavy with the scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of Nicole's rose bushes. The suburban street was quiet, houses lined like polite sentries in the glow of their porch lights. I crossed the driveway, unlocked my car, and slid into the driver's seat. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, but I forced them still. Headlights appeared in the distance, 2 beams sharp and deliberate, cutting up the street toward me. I turned the key and eased away from the curb, driving 2 blocks before pulling over beneath the shadow of a maple tree. From here, I could see their house without being seen. The patrol car stopped in front of Lucas's driveway. 2 officers stepped out, one tall, one stocky, both moving with the quiet authority of people who already knew what they were here to do. The front door opened. Lucas appeared, confusion etched across his face. Nicole hovered behind him, one manicured hand resting against her chest in that delicate, calculated way she used when she wanted to look like the victim in a story no one had told yet. I could not hear their words, but I didn't need to. The body language was enough. Lucas gesturing toward the inside of the house, the officers asking questions, Nicole stepping forward to add something that made the taller officer's brows knit together. The glow of my phone pulled my gaze down again. Another message. They plan to have you taken today. My breath slowed to a dangerous calm. My son, my only child, the boy who once clung to my leg during thunderstorms, was standing at his door talking to the police about me, and his wife was right there beside him, lending her hand to the work. I kept my eyes on them from the shadows, my car engine silent. My mind was already reaching backward, gathering moments I had brushed aside. Nicole's strange comments about my memory, Lucas's sudden interest in my medications, the day they insisted on helping me sort through important papers after my surgery. The dots connected like nails hammered into wood. But I stayed there, 2 streets away, unmoving, until the officers finally left. Lucas closed the door. Nicole turned off the porch light and the house disappeared into the warm darkness. I did not cry. I did not start the car immediately. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, letting the betrayal settle in my bones. whoever had sent that text had saved me tonight. But they had also pulled back the curtain on a truth that would not be undone, and I knew, sitting in that shadowed street, that the real story had only just begun. Asterisk, the glow of the phone still burned in my lap, the latest words hammering into me with slow, deliberate weight. They plan to have you taken today. I read it once, twice, a third time, each repetition scraping away another layer of disbelief. I thought of the dinner I had just left, the warmth of the rosemary lamb, the flicker of candles, the polite conversation about the weather and Lucas's new project at work. All of it now felt staged, a set carefully arranged for a play whose ending had already been decided without my consent. The street was still. My hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. Somewhere behind the closed curtains of their house, Nicole would be clearing the dishes, Lucas would be nodding at whatever she said, and both of them would be waiting for news that I was gone, removed, neatly taken off the board like a chess piece in a game I had not agreed to play. It was not the kind of betrayal that arrives with shouting and slammed doors. This was quiet treachery. It came wrapped in silk and served alongside dessert, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized it had been in motion far longer than I wanted to admit. I let my head fall back against the seat. My mind began pulling at threads I had tucked away, little moments that had seemed strange at the time but harmless enough to ignore. 2 weeks ago, Nicole's sunroom, the light poured in through tall glass panels, pooling over her perfect white cushions. We were having tea, chamomile for me, something expensive and green for her. She had leaned back in her chair, her smile thin. "Don't worry, Claire," she'd said, almost playfully. "We'll take care of you when your mind goes." Lucas had laughed, a short, awkward sound that trailed off too quickly. I'd smiled along, because what else do you do when your family makes a joke in poor taste? I told myself it was just dark humor, the sort that falls flat but means nothing, but the memory would not stay harmless now. In the dim light of my car, I replayed the moment and saw the way she had looked at me, not with warmth, not with the affection of a daughter-in-law speaking to her husband's mother. It was an appraisal, the kind of look you give a house you are already imagining gutting and remodeling. The first pin of unease lodged itself there, sharp enough to remember, dull enough to ignore. Until tonight. Another image surfaced. Nicole, calling me 3 nights ago just after I had taken my evening medication. My words had been slow, my mind drifting. She had kept the conversation light, almost meaningless, asking about my sleep, whether I'd been remembering to pay my bills. At the time, it felt like concern. Now, it felt like gathering evidence. My fingers tightened on the phone. There was more, Lucas avoiding direct answers when I asked about their new car. Nicole bringing me special tea she said was good for calming the mind. Little slips in conversation where one of them would repeat something I had supposedly said, something I could not remember saying at all. It had been gradual, so gradual that I almost believed them. Almost believed that maybe my memory was faltering, that I was imagining their evasions, that perhaps age was quietly stealing pieces of me without my noticing. But now, with a stranger's warning burning in my hand, the fog was gone. They had been building a case against me, slowly, carefully, the way a spider spins a web, each strand invisible until the trap is complete. A thought cut through me like ice. If I had stayed at that table tonight, they would have had what they needed. The police would have arrived to find a confused, possibly disoriented woman. Nicole would have told them about my episodes. Lucas would have nodded with just the right amount of sadness. And the paperwork would already be ready. Guardianship, power of attorney, control over my home, my accounts, my life. I pressed the phone to my chest, the screen cooling against my skin. Whoever had sent that message had not just warned me. They had pulled me out of a noose I had not even realized was tightening. But who were they? The number was unfamiliar, no name, no hint of identity. I opened the call log, tapped the message, and found it unlisted. My mind ran through possibilities: a neighbor, a friend of a friend. Someone inside the system, someone who had seen the paperwork before it was filed. Another buzz jolted me. Do not go home yet. Check your house before you sleep there. The words hit harder than the last. My home, my sanctuary, the place I locked every night, where I kept the small fireproof safe tucked away in the hallway closet, a safe that held my will, my living trust, the documents outlining exactly what I wanted done with my home and savings after I was gone. If they had been planning this for months, why wouldn't they try to get those papers too? I started the car, my headlights cut through the darkness as I made my way back. Every turn of the wheel measured, every shadow at the side of the road. A possible watcher. When I pulled into my driveway, I did not go straight to the door. I sat for a long moment, scanning the front windows, the bushes, the quiet street. Nothing moved. The night was as still as it had been when I left for dinner. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me with the deadbolt sliding into place. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner met me, the one I used every Sunday. But beneath it was something faint, something out of place. The faint, musty whiff of air from a closet left open too long. My eyes went to the hallway. The closet door was ajar. A single breath caught in my throat. I moved toward it, each step deliberate. My hand closed around the edge of the door and pushed inside. Behind the winter coats and a stack of old boxes, the safe sat exactly where it had always been. I knelt, entered the code, and listened for the click. The door swung open. Empty. Every paper gone. No slow drop in my stomach. No dizzy wave of shock, just a sudden, solid weight, as if my body had turned to stone. They had been here, not guessed, not suspected. They had been inside my home with a key I never gave them. I closed the safe and stood, the cold in my chest spreading to my fingertips. They thought they were clever. They thought they were invisible, but they had left me breathing, and that was their first mistake. I could barely remember the ride to the bank. My hands clutched my handbags so tightly that my knuckles ached. The taxi driver tried to make conversation, but his words washed over me like meaningless noise. I only heard the thundering in my chest. My son's voice from 2 nights ago echoed in my mind, calm, confident, assured that the house was mine now. The words had seemed so final, so absolute. But his wife's pale face when I contradicted him haunted me. There was truth in her expression, and it wasn't the kind of truth you could hide for long. When I stepped inside the bank, the air conditioning wrapped around me, cool but suffocating. The marble floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and a faint scent of freshly printed paper mixed with the metallic tang of coins and ink. People bustled about, their footsteps sharp against the tiles, each of them on their own urgent business. Mine, however, was different. Mine was about the foundation of my life. A young receptionist greeted me, her smile rehearsed and perfect. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Mr. Cameron," I replied, steady, but clipped. "Tell him it's about a property transfer." Her fingers danced over the keyboard, and in a moment, she looked up with the same polished smile. "He's available right this way." I followed her down a hallway lined with framed certificates and awards. Each step felt heavier than the last. My mind was busy replaying the past 3 decades' birthdays in that house. The smell of freshly baked bread in the kitchen, the worn armchair by the window where my late husband used to read the newspaper. That house wasn't just bricks and plaster, it was my life's tapestry. And I had to know who was unraveling it. The office door was already open. Mr. Cameron stood behind a large desk, his gray hair neatly combed, glasses perched low on his nose. His expression was warm, the kind reserved for old clients he had known for years. "Ah, Mrs. Rafiq," he said, rising to shake my hand. "It's been a while, please sit." I lowered myself into the chair, clutching my handbag on my lap like a shield. "Mr. Cameron, I'll come straight to the point," I began. "My son claims he's transferred the title of my house into my name. I want you to confirm if that's true." Something flickered in his eyes, too quick for most to catch, but I had been a school teacher for 30 years. I knew when someone was measuring their words. He leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. "Mrs. Rafiq, property transfers are sensitive matters. I can't share certain details without proper documentation or authorization." I leaned forward, my voice firm. "Mr. Cameron, this is my house we are talking about. I am the one living there, the one who paid for its upkeep for years. I need the truth, and I need it now." His lips pressed together. He opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and flipped it open with deliberate slowness. My eyes followed his hands, searching for a clue. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Your son did initiate a transfer, but it wasn't into your name." The words hit me like a slap. My spine stiffened. "Then whose name?" I asked, my voice icy. He hesitated. "His wife's." I felt my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The room seemed to narrow, the air thicker, heavier. "You're telling me he took my house and gave it to her?" "I'm telling you," he replied carefully, "that the legal title is now in her name. The documents were signed 2 weeks ago." I oversaw the process myself. A strange calm settled over me. But it wasn't peace, it was the cold stillness before a storm. I remembered the exact day 2 weeks ago. I had been baking my son's favorite carrot cake because they were visiting. His wife had smiled politely, stayed in the living room, and sipped tea while I worked in the kitchen. All the while, they must have known this was already done. Did he mention my consent? I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. Cameron shifted uncomfortably. Your name was never on the original deed, legally. He didn't need it. I closed my eyes for a second. That detail, I had known it. Deep down, the house had been bought in my husband's name years ago. When he passed, it went to our son, the only child. I trusted him to keep it safe for the family. It never occurred to me he would move it out of reach. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer the trembling mother who had entered the bank. Mr. Cameron, I said slowly, I want copies of every single document related to this transfer. He hesitated again. That's irregular. So, is stealing from your own mother? I replied sharply. His gaze dropped. He nodded and began printing. The whir of the printer filled the room, each sheet landing in the tray like a nail in the coffin of my trust. He handed me a neat stack of papers, the ink still warm. I didn't look at them right away. Instead, I slid them into my bag and stood. Thank you, I said, though my tone was cold enough to freeze steel. As I walked back through the lobby, my legs felt strangely steady. The shock had turned into something sharp. Resolve. My son and his wife thought I would never find out. They thought I was too old, too trusting, too gentle to dig. They were wrong. When I stepped out into the sunlight, the heat hit my face. But inside I was colder than I had ever been. The game had changed. And now, I was going to play by my own rules. The next morning, I woke with an ache in my chest. The kind that comes not from age but from betrayal that refuses to loosen its grip. I made tea. Not because I wanted it but because the ritual of boiling water and hearing the faint clink of the spoon in the cup felt like the only normal thing left in my life. I didn't even sweeten it. Bitterness suited the day. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at the lawyer's number I had saved the night before. My thumb hovered over the call button for far too long. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. I would be walking down a path that might tear my family apart completely. But then I thought of my husband's voice in my memory, soft but firm, telling me to protect myself. I pressed the button. Mrs. Shaw, the voice answered, calm, steady, professional. Double quotes. Yes, it's about my house, I said, my voice catching on the last word. I explained what had happened. My son's bold claim, my suspicion, the way my daughter-in-law's face drained of color. The lawyer listened without interruption. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. If your son had transferred the house into your name, you would have received official paperwork. Transfers of ownership leave a trail. If you have not seen or signed any such documents, the property is almost certainly not in your name. I asked him to check. I gave him the address, the year we purchased it, the details my husband had so carefully filed away. He promised to get back to me within 24 hours. Those hours dragged like a lifetime. I spent them pacing, glancing at the photo frames on the walls. Each one felt heavier now, like it was carrying the weight of memories I could no longer trust. There was one of my son, maybe 10 years old, grinning with 2 front teeth missing, holding a kite. Back then, he had trusted me to untangle the strings when they knotted. Now he was the one creating the knots. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. Mrs. Shaw, the lawyer said, his tone clipped but not unkind. Your son is still the sole legal owner of the house. There has been no transfer. In fact, the only recent activity was a mortgage top-up taken out last month. The room tilted. A mortgage? I asked, my hand tightening around the receiver. We paid off the mortgage years ago? Yes, ma'am. But it seems your son took an additional loan against the property. A significant sum. It was deposited into an account under his name. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator. My knees felt weak, so I sat down. Before I fell, he hadn't just lied. He had taken something my husband and I had worked decades for and turned it into cash for himself. I asked the lawyer for advice, but my mind was already racing ahead of his words. Evidence. I needed proof. Something that would strip away the last veil my son was hiding behind. My hands shook as I opened the drawer in the study where we kept all the property papers. The neat rows of files greeted me like old friends. But when I reached for the one marked house, deeds and ownership, my stomach dropped. It was gone. I pulled every file out, stacking them on the floor, leafing through receipts from 20 years ago, birthday invitations, even old bank statements, no deed, no transfer document. Nothing. I sat on the carpet surrounded by the wreckage of my life's paperwork, my breath coming fast. That file had been there 2 months ago. I knew because I had taken it out to dust the shelf, which meant someone had taken it deliberately, and there were only 2 people who had been inside this house recently without me watching them, my son and his wife. The doorbell rang then. Sharp and loud. When I opened the door, there they were. My son stood with his hands in his pockets, his wife beside him with a brittle smile. "Can we come in, Amy?" he asked. I stepped aside, but my heart was already bracing for war. They sat at the dining table as if they were guests, not the people who had set fire to my trust. My son spoke first, about yesterday. He said, "I think you misunderstood. The house is technically still under my name because the bank hasn't processed everything yet." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "Don't lie to me again." His eyes flickered, his wife's hands tightened in her lap. I spoke to my lawyer. I continued. There was no transfer. There was, however, a mortgage taken out last month. Care to explain where that money went? His jaw tightened. It was an investment. I'll pay it back. You mortgaged my home for an investment without telling me. It's not your home. He shot back before he could stop himself. The words landed like a slap. I heard his wife inhale sharply, her eyes darting toward him as if she knew he had just made a fatal mistake. I straightened my back. "You're right," I said slowly. "Legally, it's not mine yet, but you have just confirmed what I needed to hear." I stood, went to the cabinet, and pulled out my phone. "From this moment on, we will speak through my lawyer." My son started to say something, but his wife touched his arm, shaking her head. They left without another word. When the door closed behind them, I locked it. Not just the door. I locked away whatever fragile hope I had left that this could be fixed with love alone. This was no longer about family. This was about survival. When I woke up the next morning, the weight in my chest was heavier than ever, the kind that makes breathing feel like a deliberate act. I lay there in my bed, staring at the pale sunlight sneaking through the curtains, wondering if it was worth even trying to keep my chin up anymore. Yesterday had been a battlefield, words flying like arrows, tension coiled in every muscle of my body, and yet, despite all of it, I could still see Daniel's smug little smirk when he thought he'd bested me. I could still hear her voice. "It's done, Mother, you don't need to understand every detail." No, I thought that was the problem. I did need to understand, and they knew it. I swung my legs out of bed and pressed my feet onto the cold wooden floor. That shock of chill grounded me for a moment. I couldn't keep drifting in this fog. If I did, they'd win, and I wasn't raised to surrender. My father used to tell me, "They can't take your home from you if you know how to fight for it." At the time, I thought he was being poetic. Now, it felt like prophecy. I dressed slowly, carefully, pulling on a deep green cardigan and a soft cream blouse. It was my armor for the day, subtle but strong, as I buttoned the cuffs. I looked at my reflection, a woman staring back with tired eyes but a set jaw. I didn't look broken yet, and that was something. Downstairs, the quiet was eerie. My kitchen, my sanctuary for years, looked staged, like a picture from a real estate brochure, not lived in, just prepared for someone else to imagine themselves there. My eyes flicked to the breakfast table. No fresh bread, no half-finished crossword puzzle, no small signs of me. I brewed coffee anyway because some rituals aren't just habits, they're survival. The smell wrapped around me like a reminder that I still belonged here. I was mid-sip when I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. They were here. I walked to the window and saw them, Daniel and Claire, stepping out of their shiny black SUV. Daniel's stride was brisk, businesslike. Claire's was slower, deliberate, as though she were walking into her own domain. They didn't even glance up toward the window. That told me everything. They hadn't come to see me. They'd come to continue whatever plan they'd started. I opened the door before they could knock. "Morning," Daniel said, not meeting my eyes. He stepped past me into the hallway as though he owned it. Claire followed, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "We need to talk about a few things," she said, her tone light but laced with that patronizing undertone I'd come to know so well. I crossed my arms. "Then talk," Daniel exhaled, impatient. "We've been going over the paperwork, and there are still some details we need you to sign. The quicker we get this done, the smoother everything will go. Smooth for who? I asked. For all of us. Claire cut in, her voice calm in a way that made my skin prickle. This is about the future, not the past. I took a slow step toward her. The past is exactly what you're trying to erase. Her eyes flashed just for a second, and that tiny crack in her mask made my pulse quicken. I'd seen it, the sliver of truth. She wasn't as composed as she wanted me to think. I pressed on. You didn't tell me everything, did you? She tilted her head, feigning confusion. About what? The transfer, the so-called gift. You want me to sign something without explaining what you've already done? Daniel rubbed his temple. Mom, this is exhausting. Can't you just trust me? I gave him a look that made him falter. Trust is earned, Daniel, and you've been spending it like loose change. Claire's mouth twitched, a smile trying to hide, or maybe a flinch. She glanced at Daniel before speaking again. There's nothing sinister here. We're just streamlining ownership. Streamlining it right out of my name, I said. The silence that followed was thick, brittle. Daniel shifted on his feet. Claire's eyes stayed locked on mine, but her grip on her handbag tightened until her knuckles paled. That was when I realized I wasn't powerless, not yet. There was something here she didn't want exposed, and if I could find it, I could stop all of this. I softened my tone, pretending to yield. Fine, leave the documents. I'll look them over. Claire hesitated, before nodding. We'll need them back by Friday. When they left, I stood at the door until the SUV disappeared down the road. Then I carried the folder to my kitchen table, sat down, and began to read. Every line, every clause, every trick. And there it was, buried deep in the legal jargon, a clause that would hand over full and irrevocable control to Daniel and Claire under the guise of joint management. My signature would seal it permanently. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from anger. They thought they could outplay me. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Hello? Came the voice on the other end. James, I said. It's me. I think I'm going to need a very good lawyer. By the next morning, the calm in my life had shattered completely. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. At first, I thought it might be some promotional messages or bank notifications. But when I reached over and saw more than 20 unread messages, all from neighbors, old friends, and even distant relatives, my stomach dropped. Each notification was a fragment of chaos. Is it true? I saw something online about your house. Why didn't you tell us? I sat up in bed, my chest tight. I opened the first message and felt my breath catch. There it was, a post, plastered across Facebook, shared in neighborhood groups, spreading faster than spilled water on tile. A smiling picture of my son and his wife standing in front of my house, with a caption from his wife, finally, it's ours, the home we've dreamed of, officially transferred, no more waiting. The comments section was buzzing with congratulations, emojis, and heartwarming wishes from people who didn't know the truth. They thought I had generously handed my home to my son and his bride, a picture-perfect gesture of maternal love. My name wasn't even mentioned, except in one comment by an old school friend. So sweet of your mom to do this for you. And then came my son's reply, one that made my blood run cold. Yes. She always wanted us to have it. We're so grateful. I read that sentence over and over until the words blurred. He had publicly claimed that I wanted them to take my house, that this was my choice, my gift. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was rewriting history in broad daylight. I felt something ignite inside me, a slow, dangerous burn. I had been patient, I had been calm. I had given him a chance to explain, to back down, to admit the truth, privately, but now he had taken this betrayal into the public sphere, turning me into some silent benefactor who just handed over her life's security out of motherly generosity. No, not anymore. I made tea with trembling hands, though I hardly drank it. I paced the kitchen, replaying every moment of the past few weeks in my mind, his wife's smug little smile, the way she had gone pale when I told him the papers weren't in my name, the evasive conversations, the rushed excuses, and now, this, a performance for the world. I could already imagine what would happen if I did nothing. They would settle in, redecorate, and tell the story of their inheritance to anyone who asked. I'd be painted as the saintly, aging mother who stepped aside so her children could build their dreams, and by the time anyone discovered the truth, it would be too late. The lie would have hardened into fact. By noon, my resolve was iron. I went upstairs to my study, pulled out the old leather folder where I kept important papers and began flipping through. My hands were steady now, my anger had crystallized into focus. I reviewed the deed, the purchase papers, the property tax receipts, all still in my name. The truth was on my side. And I intended to wield it like a blade, but I also knew that, if I confronted them head-on right now, they would twist and spin again. No, I needed to be strategic. I needed to gather not just my documents, but also proof of their deception, their own words. Their public claims, their online posts. So, I took screenshots, every comment, every caption, every emoji laid in response they'd given. I saved them neatly in a folder labeled evidence. And while I worked, the messages kept coming. Some were sympathetic, some were curious, and a few were downright cutting. One from a distant cousin I barely spoke to. Stung the most. You've always been dramatic, maybe you should just let them have it. They're young, they need it more. It was such a casual dismissal of my years of work, my sacrifices, my independence, that, more than anything, reminded me why I couldn't let this go. By evening, I had a plan. Step 1, secure the legal ground. Step 2, control the narrative before they destroyed mine. I called my lawyer, a steady-voiced woman who had handled my will years ago. When I told her the situation, she didn't gasp or stutter. She simply said, "Bring me everything, we'll set the record straight." Her calmness soothed me in a way nothing else had all day. For the first time, I felt that this battle wasn't just mine to fight alone. I slept that night with the folder of documents on my bedside table, a strange kind of comfort. I knew the days ahead would be messy. There would be arguments, accusations, maybe even a full-blown family rupture, but my decision was made. They thought they could take my home and turn me into a footnote in my own life story. They were about to learn that I was still the author. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house long before they arrived. I had spent hours preparing it. The kind of dinner that once brought my family together. Garlic mashed potatoes, fresh green beans, tossed in butter, and a warm apple pie cooling on the counter. Every dish was a memory, every flavor a reminder of the days when laughter and conversation flowed easily across my dining table. But those days were gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that now lingered between me and my son. Still, I held on to the hope that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe we could talk without his wife cutting in with her sharp little remarks. Maybe he would look at me like he used to, with warmth instead of guarded indifference. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and smoothed my apron. "Here we go," I whispered to myself before opening the door. There they stood. My son, Daniel, looked handsome but tired, his hair slightly tousled. His wife, Clara, wore a cream-colored blouse that looked expensive enough to come with its own security tag. She carried herself like she was arriving at a meeting rather than her mother-in-law's home. "Come in," I said, forcing a smile. Daniel stepped forward and hugged me briefly, his arms stiff, his eyes flicking toward Clara as if checking her reaction. She offered a quick, dry thank you before stepping inside, her gaze sweeping the living room in that way she always did, as though she were silently taking inventory of my belongings. The table was already set. I had even polished the old silverware that belonged to my mother. Daniel noticed. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said, though his tone made it sound more like an inconvenience than appreciation. "It's no trouble at all," I replied, placing the chicken in the center of the table. "It's nice to have family over." We began eating, but the silence felt like a stone in the middle of the table. Daniel asked about the weather. Clara complimented the chicken without looking at me. And I tried to keep the conversation alive. Halfway through the meal, Clara placed her fork down and leaned back in her chair. "We actually wanted to talk to you about something important," she said, her voice coated in that polite but deadly tone I had come to know too well. Daniel looked uneasy, but he didn't stop her. Clara continued, "The house situation. We think it's time to finalize some paperwork. Daniel and I have been discussing the property, and we feel it would be best if things were settled now rather than later." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What exactly do you mean by settled?" Daniel cleared his throat. "We thought you'd be more comfortable if everything was transferred officially. That way, you won't have to worry about it in the future." "In the future," I repeated, my voice tightening. "I live here now. Why are we talking about it as if I'm not going to?" Clara smiled faintly. "It's just about being practical. We could take over the responsibility. It would be easier for you." The words hit me like cold water. Easier for me. or easier for them to take what they wanted. I set my fork down, staring at both of them. You think I should sign my home over to you while I'm still sitting in it? Daniel shifted in his seat. It's not like that, Mom, we're just thinking ahead. No, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the room. You're thinking about yourselves. Clara's expression hardened. You're being emotional? This is just a logical step. Logical. I leaned forward. I built my life in this house. Every brick, every memory, every sacrifice is here. And you want me to hand it over because it's convenient for you? Daniel's eyes dropped to his plate. Clara didn't flinch. I felt something inside me snap. The last thread of patience I had been clinging to. If this is the reason you came to dinner, then you can leave. Now, the silence that followed was heavier than any I had known. Clara stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Come on, Daniel, she said. This was clearly a waste of time. Daniel hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering between me and her. Then, without a word, he followed her out. The door closed behind them, and I sat back down at the table, staring at the untouched apple pie. My hands trembled, but my heart felt oddly steady. They thought they could pressure me into surrendering what was mine, but they had no idea. This house was not just wood and stone. It was my history, my independence, my proof that I had survived everything life had thrown at me, and I was not about to give it away. The rain had stopped by the time I reached home, but the air still smelled of wet earth and something heavier, the scent of endings. My shoes left a trail of muddy imprints across the hallway tiles, yet I didn't bother taking them off. The adrenaline from the confrontation earlier was still humming in my blood, making me feel as if I were walking on a thin rope over an endless drop. I made tea without tasting it, set it on the table, and stared at the unopened mail pile. I had ignored it for days, bills, advertisements, meaningless junk, but today, one envelope caught my attention. Cream paper, elegant handwriting, my name spelled out with care, no return address. I tore it open, my fingers trembling more from curiosity than fear. The first line stole my breath. Mrs. Khan, you do not know me, but I know about you, and I know about the house. I sank into the chair, clutching the letter as though it might dissolve in my hands. My eyes darted down the page, taking in each sentence like a series of blows. The writer claimed to be a former friend of Sana's, my daughter-in-law, someone who had worked with her years ago. According to the letter, Sana had been planning for months to transfer my property into her parents' name. She had forged documents, manipulated bank records, and even convinced my son that the change was for my own protection. Protection. The word tasted like poison. The letter went on to describe in detail how the forged documents had been processed. There were dates, locations, even the names of two people at the local land registry office who were allegedly paid to fast-track the paperwork. And at the bottom, in looping script, it read, "Do not trust her, she has done this before, she will do it again." For a long time, I sat frozen, the clock ticking behind me, each second a hammer striking my composure. My tea had gone cold and touched. This was more than betrayal. This was premeditated theft. It was not a misunderstanding, not a lapse in judgment. Sana had played a long, patient game, and she thought I would never find out, but now I knew. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No shouting, no sobbing, no pacing the floor, just a stillness that felt heavier than rage. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the center of the table as though it were evidence in a courtroom. In that moment, a clarity formed in my mind, sharp, cold, and merciless. This was no longer about saving the house. This was about reclaiming my dignity. I had spent too many years thinking my role as a mother was to forgive endlessly, to patch over every crack no matter how deep. But forgiveness without accountability is just enabling cruelty. Cruelty. I thought of my son, of how he had looked away when I asked him direct questions, of how he had let her speak for him, as if his voice had been leased out. I could not understand how the boy I raised had turned into a man who would stand silent, while his wife stripped his mother's name from her own home. A knock at the door startled me. It was late, the street quiet. I opened it to find Mrs. Rafiq, my neighbor, clutching her shawl against the night chill. "I saw Sana today," she began, her eyes narrowing. "She was meeting with some men near the main market. One of them is the same fellow who handled my brother's property papers, and let me tell you, he is not a man to be trusted." The letter in my pocket burned against my skin. This was no Coincidence, the web was larger than I thought. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly, my voice steady, and please, do not mention this to anyone else yet. She nodded, though curiosity gleamed in her eyes, and shuffled back toward her gate. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled out my old metal trunk from under the bed. Inside were documents from decades past, the original deed to the house, my will. Receipts for every major repair. I spread them across the table, comparing them to the copies I had been shown by Sana. The differences were subtle but damning, dates slightly altered, signatures smoothed over. My name repositioned like a piece of furniture in a room she was redecorating without my consent. By midnight, my decision was made. I would not confront them with shouting matches or tears. I would build my own case, slowly, methodically, just as she had. And when I moved, it would be with finality. Before going to bed, I wrote one line in my journal. They think I am cornered. They have forgotten. I built this house from nothing. As I closed the book, I realized I was no longer afraid. I was ready. Morning came like an unwelcome guest. I barely slept. My mind had been gnawing at the same thought all night. The conversation with Daniel's wife. Her pale face when I told her the truth, and the cold silence that followed. But more than that, I couldn't shake the image of my own son, standing there so sure of himself, telling me he had transferred the house into my name when I knew he hadn't. That lie was still lodged in my chest like a splinter. I decided that day I needed to see everything with my own eyes, no more relying on words, no more being blindsided. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out the old metal box where I kept every legal document I'd ever signed. The house deed from 25 years ago was in there. The one with my late husband's signature beside mine. That was the last time my name had truly been tied to this property in a way no one could question. Everything else, every whisper of a change, was just talk until proven otherwise. The sunlight coming through the window felt too warm for the storm brewing inside me. I called my lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, a quiet man with sharp eyes who had handled our family matters for decades. When I explained the situation, there was a pause on the other end of the line. Not confusion, not disbelief, just a measured silence, like a surgeon listening to a patient list symptoms before giving a grim diagnosis. Bring me every paper you have, he said finally. And I'll pull the public record for the property. We'll see exactly what's been done. I arrived at his office an hour later with the metal box in my arms. The secretary, a young woman with kind eyes, offered me water, but I waved it away. I was afraid if I sat still too long, I'd lose my nerve. Hargrove took the box, spread the documents across his desk, and began reading. I watched him move through each page, his brow tightening. Then he leaned back, steepling his fingers. As far as the county's concerned, he said slowly, you don't own the house. You haven't for 3 years. The air left my lungs in a rush. 3 years, I whispered, how I never signed anything I would remember. You didn't have to sign anything if there was a power of attorney in place, he said, his voice measured but not unkind. My stomach turned. I remembered, vaguely, signing some papers after my surgery years ago. When Daniel had insisted it was just to help with bills and errands while I recovered. I had trusted him, my own flesh and blood. Hargrove slid a file toward me. The property was transferred into a trust controlled by Daniel, and last year, the trust was amended to add his wife as co-trustee. The two of them can do whatever they want with it, sell it, lease it, even give it away. I stared at the black ink on white paper, my hands trembling. My name was nowhere. I felt suddenly like a stranger in my own life. What now? I asked, my voice hoarse. That depends, he said. Do you want to fight? The word hung in the air between us. Fight. I thought of all the years I had spent building this home, the sweat and worry, the memories etched into every corner. My late husband's laughter on the porch, the height marks on the kitchen doorframe from when Daniel was just a boy, and now, it could all be taken without so much as a knock on my bedroom door. Yes, I said finally, my voice gaining strength. I want to fight. He nodded, scribbling notes. Then we'll start by tracing every signature, every filing. If there's fraud, we'll find it. And if there's not, we'll make it very difficult for them to touch what's left. I walked out of that office with the metal box in my hands and a new kind of fire in my chest. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman defending her life's work. And I would not be quiet about it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again. The documents spread before me. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud, replaying every choice, every conversation, every moment I had let love blind me to the truth. If my son thought I would go down without a fight, he was about to learn that the woman who raised him was far stronger than he remembered. And this time, I would be the one setting the terms. The morning of the court hearing dawned gray and heavy. As if the sky itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. I had barely slept. The documents lay neatly stacked in my bag, proof of my ownership, letters from the bank, my father's old deed, and the papers my son had tried to forge. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, my hair, streaked with silver, framed, a face that no longer looked afraid. The lines around my mouth had deepened, but so had my resolve. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. This was about dignity, about refusing to be erased from my own life. When I arrived at the courthouse, they were already there, my son in a dark suit, his posture rigid, and beside him, his wife. Her hands clutched around her designer purse like it was a lifeline. She avoided my eyes. He didn't. His gaze was hard, almost defiant. We didn't speak. The silence between us was thicker than any wall we had ever shared. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool, sterile. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "We have this, stay calm." The judge entered, and the proceedings began. My son's lawyer painted a picture of a generous, dutiful child who had gifted his mother a house out of love. The words felt like acid. I sat still, hands folded, my heart beat steady. Then it was our turn. My lawyer spoke with quiet precision, laying out each document, each date, each glaring inconsistency, the forged signature, the altered notary stamp, the sudden transfer attempt timed suspiciously with my hospital stay. When they presented my own testimony, I stood. My voice didn't tremble. I told the judge how the house had been in my family for decades, how my father had built it with his bare hands, how it had been my safe place through grief, through raising my son alone, through every hardship life had thrown at me. And then I told them how I discovered my son's betrayal, how his wife had gone pale when I called him out, how I had been told, without shame, that I should be grateful for what little they allowed me to keep. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even my son wasn't looking at me anymore. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched, but his eyes were fixed on the floor. The judge reviewed the evidence, asked a few questions, and then delivered the verdict. The transfer was nullified. The deed remained mine. All legal rights to the property stayed with me. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was an aching sadness. I had won the battle. But the cost was the bond I had once believed unbreakable. As we left the courtroom, my son brushed past me without a word. His wife followed, her face pale again. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting long shadows on the courthouse steps. My lawyer congratulated me, but I could barely hear him. I was already walking away, my bag heavy not just with papers, but with the weight of everything I had lost. When I got home, I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt mine again. Every creak of the floorboards, every chip in the paint, every window that looked out onto the street, they were mine. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, letting the warmth seep into my hands. I didn't know if my son and I would ever speak again, but I knew one thing. I had stood my ground. I had refused to be erased, and in that quiet, with the sun streaming through the window, I realized that sometimes survival isn't about keeping everything you love. Sometimes it's about keeping yourself. The house stood quiet that morning, bathed in the soft gold of a sunrise that seemed to stretch endlessly across the horizon. It was mine again, truly mine, yet it no longer felt like the fortress I had once clung to as proof of my worth and stability. I walked barefoot through the hallway, my fingers grazing the familiar walls. The wood warm under my touch, each room whispered memories, some sweet, some bitter. There was the dining room where we once laughed until our stomachs hurt, the living room where my son had sprawled on the floor as a boy, playing with his toy cars. But there was also the echo of his cold voice, the moment he claimed he had given me what was already mine. That wound had cut deep. Now, though, those wounds were no longer open, they had healed into scars that told a story not of defeat, but of survival. I stood by the window that overlooked the garden. The roses had bloomed fiercely this season, as if they too had something to prove. Their petals glistened with morning dew, unapologetically alive. I breathed in their scent, feeling something I hadn't in a long time: peace. This journey had taken pieces of me I never thought I could give away. It had stripped me of illusions, tested my strength, and forced me to face the truth. Love is not blind devotion, and family is not a license for betrayal. I had learned to draw boundaries, not walls of bitterness, but gates of self-respect. The people who walked through them now would be those who valued my presence, not my possessions. The documents were signed. The house was safe. My name etched into the title deed was more than legal ownership. It was a declaration that I had reclaimed my life. I thought of my son. I wondered if he would ever see the harm he had caused, if the day would come when remorse would outweigh his pride. I hoped for it, but I no longer depended on it. My healing could not be chained to his choices. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear lift from my shoulders. I was free, not just in my home, but in my heart. I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped outside, letting the cool morning air wrap around me. The sun was rising higher, chasing away the shadows. I smiled, not the polite smile I used to wear for the world, but a real one. The kind that comes when you've walked through fire and realized you are not only still standing, but stronger than before. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the chapter I chose for myself. And as I sat there, watching the day unfold, I knew one thing for certain: no one would ever take my home, my peace, or my dignity from me again.